Welcome to New Beginnings with Karen Delk, where we celebrate the creativity, courage, and wisdom of people creating change. We highlight those who chart new paths, make new life and career choices, and face turning points. We explore lessons that accompany changes, both welcome and unwelcome. New Beginnings covers topics from the worlds of business, education, health, and the arts. Our guests and the stories we share inspire viewers to make positive changes within their own lives and communities. Now here is our host, Karen Delk.
Welcome to New Beginnings with Karen Delk, and I am pleased to have a wonderful returning guest, Tony Lopez, who is President and Managing Director of Azure Group and the Chairman of the Board for Prospanica, which is the National Society of Hispanic MBAs, formerly known.
That's right.
Yes. So you were on my show before, and I wanted to have you back because we were talking about leadership and the legacy of leadership, which is the book that you have authored in a whole series.
Right.
And you've now started another book series on superheroes.
Well, it's not. It's the next stage. It's the next book in the series.
Next book in the series.
On legacy leadership. And
Okay.
thanks for having me back.
Absolutely.
That means I must have said something right the first time.
Oh, you said a lot of things right. Yeah, definitely.
But yes, I'm very excited that the next installment in the Legacy Leader series of books is coming out. And as you and I have spoken before, the whole Legacy Leadership series of books was never intended to ever be a Legacy Leader series of books, right? The first one came because Mom said, get it done. And,
Right.
And fortunately, before she passed, I was able to get it done.
That's right.
And I intended that to be the end of my writing career. I mean, after all, I was busy,
Running companies.
doing my job,
Right.
and just, being a family man and trying to raise a family and support a family and doing those things. But one book sort of evolved, and the next one came out, and then the next one came out, and all of a sudden, I'm like, there's a series buried in here somewhere. And I got to thinking about, well, what's next? Because in the series, we talked about the mechanics of leadership, and then we talked about how to apply those in the second book, about innovation and breakthrough thinking and how to apply leadership principles. And then we talked about what principles not to forget
Absolutely.
as you evolved in your leadership journey. And then we talked about, evaluating yourself. When you
Holding
have
up that mirror.
Holding up that mirror, right? And saying, what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? And while you can do 360s and Myers and all sorts of other psychological profile tests that help you to evaluate how well you're doing, I think if you're able to ask and answer a couple of very honest questions as you look in the mirror, with the help of some close confidants, spouses come to mind.
Absolutely.
They can tell you better than anybody
Absolutely.
what you're good at and what you're not so good at.
And your children.
Oh, especially the children.
Especially.
Because they will have no problem
And none.
telling you where you're wrong.
Exactly.
And then, that whole series was, okay, so I understand the mechanics, I understand how to apply them, I understand how to use them, how not to forget them. I evaluate myself, and that's sort of a full circle, right? And you're back to, okay, principles, application, utilization, drive performance. and come around.
Evaluate, yeah.
So I get a lot of invitations to do speaking on the subject, and I love it. I love talking about leadership and so forth. But one day somebody says, come and do a talk for us on leadership. And I said, man, another talk on leadership. How can I make it fresh and different? And I, like most people, I grew up watching superheroes. Batman and Superman. I mean, the originals, right?
Right, yes.
We're talking about,
Yes. Original Marvels.
original.
Yes.
And of course, these days, every day there's a new superhero movie or something else coming out. So I decided, well, let me see if I can put together a leadership discussion and talk about the traits and the characteristics most important in a leader using superheroes. And so I started with an audience and I said, let's talk about leadership. And I said to the audience, and it was a fairly large audience, and I said, why don't you tell me what a leader is and what a leader is not? So the words start coming out. Visionary, motivational, inspirational, a communicator. And they just kept coming. The words kept coming. The words kept coming. And I'm saying, that's a good one, and that's a good one, and that's a good one. And I said, well, apparently what we all want in our leaders, and I hit click, and the picture that comes up behind me is a picture of Superman. And I go, because apparently we think leaders can do it all. And what we want is a superhero. Well, I've got good news and I got bad news. The good news is, you know, we can have good leaders. The bad news is they're not superheroes and they cannot do it all. But let's use superheroes to talk about leadership. And I said, let's start with Superman. And I said, well, tell me about Superman. And they start talking about, well, you know, X-ray vision, can leap tall buildings in a single bound, you know, faster than a speeding bullet, you know, can stop a locomotive, all the things that the original Superman could do. And I said, but what one thing does he have that no other superhero has? And eventually somebody says it, right? X-ray vision. And I go, right. And so leadership begins with having a vision. And they go, oh, okay, I get it. And they put Superman vision. So now that the game is on and they get it, I go, next picture. Next picture that comes up is Wonder Woman. And everybody remembers Wonder Woman,
Absolutely,
right?
particularly now.
Right, with the movie had just come out.
Yes.
So I say, well, tell me about Wonder Woman. Oh, she's got an invisible plane, and she's got the shields that stop the bullets. She's got all these, she's a great fighter. She's strong, all these things. What one thing does she have that no other superhero has? Eventually somebody says it, the truth lasso. She ropes you with the truth lasso, and you have no choice but to tell the truth. And there lies the second trait of a great leader. Be truthful, be credible, only tell the truth. Because if you don't tell a lie, you can't get caught in one, right? So now they're all excited, and they're thinking, this is a fun game.
Right.
Whether it's an audience, and I've tried it with professional audiences who are more senior, all the way to last year, right here at Princeton University,
at HISPA.
presenting it at HISPA, presenting it to young students, high school, and they get it, they love it. So the book that evolved, I titled Legacy Woman. It could also have been Legacy Man.
Yes, but I love Legacy
But we
Woman.
went with Legacy Woman.
Yes.
The legacy leader as superhero. And each of the chapters is essentially one superhero that I've chosen and linking that superhero to a trait, to a character of a leader that we must have. The fundamental traits of leaders. There are many, but in my opinion, this is the top 10. I think I have 13 chapters in the book.
Wow.
And so it uses, you know, Superman, and it uses Wonder Woman, and some others like Batman and Iron Man and Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four. And each of those, even Aquaman, who's now coming out with his own movie, right?
Absolutely.
And each of those I link to a trait of a leader. And so by the time we're done, and the audiences have heard this a number of times, they go, oh, I get it. Superman, vision. Wonder Woman, truthfulness. Captain America, loyalty. I mean, and it goes on, right?
Right.
And so the book is a whimsical view using superheroes and creating this new, brand new superhero to the world now called Legacy Woman.
Wonderful.
And Legacy Man. I
Yes.
don't want to leave the men out.
Right. Well, you've got a lot of men. You were talking Batman, Superman,
Right.
Aquaman, and I was like, we've got Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
And
But that Wonder Woman,
she's all
she
right.
trumps them all.
Oh yes, she does. She does. And I do want to talk about how leaders approach leadership, because I don't know if you think this, and I'd like to get your opinion. I think that there are different approaches to leadership based on gender.
Sure.
You know, men dominate all sectors, actually, government, private, public, and maybe women kind of trump nonprofits. I'm not 100% sure. I don't have the statistical data, but you know, it's probably 50-50, probably worldwide.
Yeah.
Right? Do you think that there are traits that women bring in a leadership role that is different than a man brings? Because I agree with all the things that you talked about. Is it that women bring a different trait, or is it the application of some of the same traits? Or what's your thought on that?
So I think, so the traits of leadership that are fundamental, character,
Vision, as
integrity,
you talked about. Yeah.
as the two non-negotiables,
Right.
right? But then being a visionary leader, being a loyal leader, a courageous leader, a good communicator, being those types of traits, right? The ones that I describe in this next book, and that I've described before in the other books, I would say agenda neutral, right? The traits themselves agenda neutral.
I would agree.
However, how a woman brings those into play and how a man might bring those into the play are clearly going to be, in some cases, very different. And how they're perceived are going to be very different, right? And so, you know, I've been fortunate to have worked with some amazing, very powerful, strong women, outstanding leaders, right? But depending on how they communicate, they might be perceived a particular way different than if the man communicated in the same way.
Absolutely.
That's just the reality, right?
Absolutely.
And depending on how they carry themselves. And so clearly there are differences, and clearly women, successful women, have figured out how to use their personal style in order to be effective as leaders. So I don't have the perfect answer. I don't know exactly what I would say, how women bring these traits out and how they can demonstrate them. But certainly they need to be able to demonstrate loyalty like any good leader, that they're credible like any good leader, that they have a good vision and a good mission, that they're passionate, that they have the anticipatory skills that we need of a leader to look at whatever environment they happen to be leading in and be able to understand that environment. Whether they have the emotional intelligence, which is one of the most important traits.
Absolutely.
Right? And I know that men and women think about things differently, right? We process information differently at times. And so how they bring that out, their empathy, the level of empathy that they can have.
And they're being inclusive.
Yes, right? Their ability to maybe be nurturing and coaching and mentoring. Those are the things we need of leaders, men and women. And somebody has asked me recently, says, you should think about writing a book on women as leaders. And I said, what qualifies me to write a book on women as leaders? I don't know that I have the qualification. I can write about leaders. And then only now I think people are starting to think more about, well, so how are women going to be able to exhibit those same traits that we say are leadership traits, fundamentals, non-negotiable leadership traits, and how do they use their position and the fact that they're women versus a man to be most effective, right? But you and I both know that the world looks at and perceives people based on some biases that they may have for whatever reasons, right? Whether it's the skin of our color of our skin, the way we speak, whether we speak with an accent or don't speak with an accent, or whether we're men and women or women, they're going to have a certain filter.
Yes.
Right? And so as a leader, I think, perhaps particularly women, although men need to do the same thing, is be aware of those filters.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you're aware of the filters and how I'm going to be perceived and how people might hear what I say and see what I do, and then act accordingly, and say appropriately the right things. But it's a fabulous question to say, well, how does a woman demonstrate leadership traits different than a man? I would say, let's agree on what the traits are, and then let's let what Ken Blanchard talks about in situational leadership rule as to whether or not they're being effective as leader, right?
Absolutely.
Can they modify their style? Can they moderate their tone, right? Do they know when to pound on the table and when to not pound on the table? Do they know how to nurture somebody versus pampering somebody, right? Do they know how to motivate an organization and align them as opposed to beating them up and the whole, floggings will continue until morale improves mindset, right? That's what I want.
Yes.
And, and again, luckily, at Ansel, the company I was with before, and at J&J and in many other companies, fabulous, examples of strong women leading and being good role models for the next generation of leaders. So.
Yeah, and I think women, I agree with all that you're saying. I think women learn how to be a situational leader based on the setup in the room and kind of the tone at the top. And if they're at the top, then they set the tone.
Yeah.
Some of the concern that women often get is, are you tough enough? And I think that's a little bit more unique to women than it is to men, perhaps. and women, you know, try to navigate that because it's a delicate line.
Sure.
Right? You don't want to be so tough that you get identified with the B word, and you don't want to be, you know, so soft that people don't perceive you as tough.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. And even how you speak, I will tell you, you're absolutely right. And I've had those conversations specifically with some women that I've had the pleasure of mentoring and coaching, right? Where I've had extremes where one particular case that I'm thinking of, incredible leader, strong, determined, courageous, passionate, all the things that you go, amazing, right? But she was really harsh in her communication, and she came across as overbearing, and so that was diminishing her ability, right?
Yeah, to be
not so much her
effective.
ability, but her effectiveness.
Yes.
Right. And so with her, we said, why don't we soften the tone, right? I don't want you to be whimsical with your or you know, wimpy with your. I just want you to soften the tone. And over time, as she did that, I mean, it was amazing, right? And then I see the other extreme where there was one woman that I'm thinking of. Again, her skills, incredible. Her energy level, unmatched. Her potential dwarfs anything that I've seen in many other people, myself included, right? And I can put names to these people. I won't today, but I can put. But this particular woman needed to be stronger in her approach. She was, you know, it was one of those things, you know, when E.F. Hutton speaks, we all listen.
Yes.
Well, when she spoke, I listened, right? So my coaching with her was, I want you to own the room. Lean into the conversation. Be stronger in your conversation. Don't ask the question, make the statement. Because you are
the authority.
You're the authority.
Yeah.
And you're the expert. And
Right.
you have the credibility in the organization to do that. And again, watching her then, and we assigned her an executive coach and helped. And boy, what comes out is just this amazing, transformative leader, right?
Yes.
And it's just a matter of fine tuning.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a young lieutenant in the Air Force, somebody said to me, you know, when the general says please, when given an order, he's just being polite. It's still an order.
Yes.
The general might say, would you please, you know, go fetch my car.
Right.
You don't sit there and go, well, general, I don't kind of feel like doing that.
Right.
No.
Right.
You know, so he's just being polite. A leader doesn't have to be overbearing.
No.
They don't have to pound on tables. They can use emotion for effect, and I
Yes.
like to do that from time to time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you can't be polite. You can't be pleasant.
Right.
You can't be direct. You can't be honest. All those things without being, let's say, discourteous. Or,
Right.
So I think your point about women is right on, but it's the same thing for men.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there are lessons to be learned across gender, and I agree with you. The principles are gender neutral.
Sure.
But I think women often, because they're generally at the top, you know, I mean, there's statistics to prove this in terms of women CEOs. We're about 4 or 5%. Even though there's progress of women in the workforce over 50%, they just haven't risen to the top yet. So
That's right. Sadly, that is certainly the truth, and the needle has not moved much in the past 20 years.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't, and more can be done in that regard.
Sure. And that may be in part why I chose to title the book "Legacy Woman."
No, I love that. I love that because I think, you know, Legacy Woman, people are going to pick it up. So you really have written a book about leadership with women in mind, but the principles
are the same.
Gender neutral.
I guess my small contribution is to say, you know, in the title.
Yes.
But you're right. I mean, it's a little, and by the way, not just for women, for people of color, and the whole diversity issue has not moved as far as it needs to.
Absolutely.
And I think that when more leaders start to recognize that it's not a nice to have, it's a business imperative.
It is.
And there are data. The data are now plentiful about the impact of you know, strong diversity. But
Yeah, we'll talk about that again.
Indeed.
We will definitely talk about
Right.
that again. So, you talked about the main criteria to be a superhero. You've talked about, the whole woman experience. And we've talked about some of the challenges. Personally, for you, what are some of the key learnings that you've had as a superhero? Leader.
Yeah, because I'm not sure I qualify as a superhero. Don't have those. I guess what I've discovered in the journey is that it's hard to stay consistent all the time with those traits and skills and competencies and criteria that we expect of our leaders, and that you will fall, that you'll make a mistake, or that you'll have a misstep. But what I have found in some of the research that I've done is, how did the leader respond to that? What was their response to it? Were they just contrite? Or were they arrogantly stubborn? Did they, to use a famous, well-known sort of event in our history, did they shake their finger at the audience and say, what they said? Or try to define the meaning of the word is? Or did they just sort of go up there and go, you know what? Yeah, I didn't, I screwed up. And I learned from this, and this is what I'm going to do going forward. So I think that for me, the lessons are, first and foremost, most fundamentally, stay true to your character and your integrity. Second, put the organization first. If you do that, and I learned that as a young captain in the Air Force, and even before that, you learn very quickly that if you put the troops first, if you put the people, and not just people who are necessarily on your team or quote unquote subordinate to you in terms of the organizational structure, but your team, your colleagues, your mates, if people around you perceive you to be more about the organization and others rather than yourself, and that hasn't always been the case for me. Oftentimes, our style can get in the way, or things can get in the way, and people who may not know you well, right, can draw a perception. In my case, because I'm on stage a lot, because I get invited to speak, because I'm often in the quote-unquote limelight, it can be a pretty difficult place to be, because they say, oh, he's just interested in the limelight. And for me, that's been a harsh lesson to learn, to say, how do you make sure that the limelight is not about you, but it's about the message you want to put out there. It's about the organization, and using that limelight to shine it onto the organization and onto others, right? So I've learned to modify my style and so that I can use that limelight and that stage appropriately to take forward the agenda that I want to take, like I'm doing with you today, right?
Absolutely.
We're talking about leadership, we're talking about legacy, women, we're talking about the agenda forward. I'm using the limelight to do that. But as a leader, as soon as you forget that it's not about you, and you forget that whole servant leadership concept, and flipping things around and making sure that you're about them and not you, you'll be cooked, right? So it's a constant reminder. And that's why I like the situational leadership model that we talked about earlier, or mentioned earlier, because it's a simple 4-quadrant model, and my little brain doesn't do things much more complicated than that, right? And for me, it's okay, what's the situation, right? And where is Karen in this situation? So what do I need to do to moderate and modify and adjust my approach so that I can best influence her? And how do I meet her where she's at so I can bring her along to where I'd like her to go? That's fundamentally the essence of situational leadership, right?
Absolutely.
But it requires you to be aware of a couple of things. Where are you? Where are they? And meeting them. And the leader who can't sort of get out of their own way can't do that.
That's right.
So for me, it's things that I've learned is that to be an effective leader, it requires that look in the mirror every day. Sometimes more often than once, to say, okay, how did I just manage that particular situation?
Exactly.
I didn't do that very well.
Exactly.
Let's try to reset that and go,
Right.
So it's a constant I think, course correction, right?
Yeah, it's an evolution.
It's an evolution.
Yeah, it's an evolution.
And you're navigating as you go. And as long as you stay true to the course in the direction you want to go in, there's going to be a number of course corrections that you do. But stay true to those fundamentals on leadership.
Right.
And the rest kind of comes along with the journey.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I'd say that, you know, what I do when I'm not doing this is I do executive coaching. And so the help of a coach can help increase your awareness.
Undoubtedly.
Help you set the goals.
Undoubtedly.
And then chart a course,
And make
a
course
strategy.
corrections,
Yeah.
right? Sure.
So that's something that's also available if either people or the organization agree to provide
and not
that.
enough people probably take advantage of it, right?
I would agree.
I think executive coaches, or life coaches, or a variety of ways we can refer to them, and I like to think of myself as a coach and as a mentor as well. Particularly as we get a little older, it gets easier to coach, right?
Absolutely.
When you have a few more life experiences, but it requires on the other side somebody who's
Coachable.
Yeah. And they're emotionally intelligent and mature and willing to sort of get the feedback and then respond to the feedback. Vast majority of people are able to do that. There are some who maybe
Who
can't.
resist.
Who resist.
Yeah.
But like the Borg said in Star Trek, resistance is futile.
Exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, I think most people who, no matter what stage you find yourself, and I'm lucky to have a few coaches and mentors in my life. I wish I had a few more.
Yeah.
But a few who have always kept me in the narrow.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is to find people who can help keep you grounded, who you have a trusted advisor,
Right.
who can tell you straight kind of where you are.
Right.
But Tony, we're out of time. It's so
Amazing.
It is amazing, isn't it? It is amazing. But I have loved having you
Thank you.
as a guest, and we're going to pick up in the next show when I have you back.
A third time?
A third time,
My
because we
goodness.
touched on diversity, and I want to go deeper into that subject. So
I look forward to doing that with you.
wonderful. I love to have you back.
Great. We'll
All
do it.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to New Beginnings.